The silk of my dress felt like a shroud, dyed a muted charcoal so I would blend into the shadows of the great pillars, exactly as my mother had commanded. Stay still, Alara. Don't speak, don't breathe too loudly, and for the love of the moon do not look him in the eye, she had hissed backstage. Beside me, my sister was a vision in shimmering gold, her scent of expensive lilies amplified by blockers to ensure she was the only olfactory siren in the room. We were at the Solstice Gala, and the entire pack was held in a collective terrified trance. The Alpha King was arriving. Today's story, The Shadow Sisters' Spark. Why the Alpha King ignored the sun for the moon, is a journey through the heart of a girl who was told she was a background character in her own life, only to find out she was the protagonist of a legend. Hello to all my beautiful viewers. I am so grateful to have you here in our storytelling circle today. I'm seeing so many familiar names in the chat. Whether you're watching from a rainy balcony in London or a sunny kitchen in Sydney, tell me where you're joining us from. How are you doing today? If this is your first time here or if you've been enjoying these stories for a while, please hit that subscribe button and join our pack. Your support is the heartbeat of this channel. My name is Alara Sterling. My first name came from a sci-fi epic about a girl lost among the stars. My last name was taken from a gritty noir film about a woman who knew too many secrets. I stood 3 paces behind my sister, my head bowed so low I could only see the polished marble floor. I was the quiet one, the plain one, the sister whose only job was to make the golden child shine brighter. I could feel the sweat pooling between my shoulder blades as the heavy scent of old wood, cold iron and predatory power flooded the hall. He was here. Caspian Vance. His first name was pulled from a high fantasy voyage, his last name from a cold-blooded thriller. He didn't just walk, he claimed the space he occupied. I heard the gasp of the crowd as he approached our family's dais. I knew my sister was flashing her most practiced, dazzling smile. I knew my father was bowing, offering up his prized daughter like a sacrificial lamb to ensure our lineage's safety. King Caspian, my sister purred, her voice a practiced melody. It is the honor of my life too. The air suddenly went dead. The sound of her voice cut off as if a hand had been clamped over her mouth. I kept my gaze on the floor, but I saw his boots, black military-grade leather, stop. They didn't stop in front of the gold hem of my sister's gown. They shifted. They turned. They stopped directly in front of my charcoal-gray slippers. A finger, calloused and hot as a brand, hooked under my chin and forced my head up. I was looking into eyes that weren't gold or brown. They were the color of a forest on fire. The dominance rolling off him was enough to bring the entire room to its knees, but his gaze wasn't on the beauty in gold. It was pinned on me, boring into my soul with a terrifying singular focus that ignored the gasps of the court and the frantic coughing of my mother. Why, Caspian growled, his voice a low vibration that made my teeth ache. Is the most radiant thing in this room trying so hard to be a shadow? In that second, the hierarchy of my entire life shattered. I wasn't the invisible sister anymore. I was the target of the most dangerous man in the kingdom. And as his thumb brushed my lower lip, I realized with a jolt of pure electricity that he wasn't looking for a queen to lead his parades. He had found his mate in the one place no one thought to look. The air in the ballroom didn't just grow cold. It became heavy as if the oxygen had been sucked out by a vacuum. My mother's hand, which had been resting supportively on my shoulder, was now digging into my collarbone with enough force to bruise. It was a silent, frantic command, disappear. No. But it was too late. The king's eyes were locked onto mine, and for the first time in 21 years, I wasn't a ghost. Living as Alara Sterling was an exercise in erasure. My mother, a woman whose ambition could swallow cities, had decided early on that our family only had room for one star. My sister, Kasia, was the sun, golden, loud, and demanding of every gaze. I was the moon, meant only to reflect her light and stay tucked away in the velvet dark of the night. My bedroom was the smallest in the manor, tucked behind the linen closet, a room filled with books about heroines I was told I could never be. You have a quiet beauty, Alara, my mother would say, her voice like silk over a razor blade. It's best not to confuse the boys. Let Kasia lead. Your turn will come when she is safely settled on a throne. But my turn never came. I was the one who edited her speeches, the one who mended the lace on her ball gowns until my fingers bled, and the one who sat in the back of every carriage, invisible even to the drivers. My deepest desire wasn't for a crown or a kingdom. It was for someone to look at me and not see a spare. I wanted to be a first. I spent my nights dreaming of a life where I could speak without permission, where my scent, the sharp, wild smell of rain on hot stone, wasn't masked by the heavy perfumes they forced upon me. I was a wolf who had been raised as a lapdog, and the pressure of the lie was beginning to crack my ribs. Standing before me now, Caspian Vance didn't look like a king who wanted a trophy. He looked like a predator who had finally found the scent he'd been tracking through a blizzard. His presence was overwhelming, the scent of cedarwood, old parchment, and a dark, musky heat that made my wolf pace restlessly behind my ribcage. He was the most powerful alpha in the Northern Hemisphere, a man rumored to have executed his own council members for a single lie. "She is just shy, Your Majesty," my father stammered, stepping forward to bridge the gap. "Alara has always been delicate. Kasha, however, has been trained in the arts of diplomacy and—" "I didn't ask for a history lesson on your disappointment," Caspian snapped, his voice cutting through my father's excuses like a guillotine. He didn't take his eyes off me. His hand still holding my chin was warm, startlingly warm. "I asked why she is hiding." I saw Kasha out of the corner of my eye. Her face was a mask of beautiful, horrified fury. This was her night. Her debut. Her king. The jealousy rolling off her was a physical thing, a sour scent that clashed with her floral perfume. She had always been my protector in public, but in private she was the one who reminded me that I was nothing without her shadow to hide in. "I'm not hiding," I whispered, my voice cracking. It was the first time I had spoken in the presence of a royal without being prompted. I felt my mother's gasp like a slap. "I am exactly where I was told to be." Caspian's eyes narrowed, a flash of something. Was it respect? Or hunger? Darkening the fiery orange of his pupils. "Then you were told wrong. A wolf with eyes like yours shouldn't be staring at the floor." In that moment, I realized Caspian wasn't just discerning. He was looking for a partner, not a puppet. He saw the books I'd read in the way I held my shoulders. He saw the fire I'd suppressed in the way my pupils dilated. He was peeling back the layers of my quiet life with a single look, and for the first time, I felt the terrifying weight of being known. But as the court began to whisper, a new fear took root. My family wouldn't let this happen. To them, my sudden visibility wasn't a blessing. It was a threat to the hierarchy they had spent decades building. As Caspian's thumb traced the line of my jaw, I knew that stepping into his light meant declaring war on my own blood. The tension in the room snapped like a dry branch under a winter boot. My mother's grip on my shoulder tightened until I felt her manicured nails piercing the thin silk of my dress. To the rest of the room, it looked like a mother's proud touch. To me, it was a warning that if I didn't lower my head, I would pay for it in the dark. "Your Majesty," my mother's voice was a forced trill, "my daughter Alara is overwhelmed. She spent her life in quiet contemplation. Perhaps a dance with Kasha would allow Alara to find her breath." Caspian Vance didn't even blink. His focus remained pinned on me, his thumb still tracing the line of my jaw with a possessiveness that made my wolf howl. "I find silence far more interesting than rehearsed speeches," he growled. Then he did the unthinkable. He didn't ask. He didn't petition my father. He simply extended a hand, a massive, scarred palm that had held the hilts of executioners' blades. "Walk with me, Alara Sterling." The room went tomb silent. My sister's scent of lilies curdled into something bitter and sharp. As I placed my hand in his, the heat of his skin felt like a brand, a permanent mark of his claim. But as we turned to leave the dais, a high-ranking beta from the Western Pack, a man known for his cruelty and his greed, stepped into our path. "A moment, King Caspian," the man sneered, his eyes flicking to me with blatant disregard. "The law of the Great Gathering states that a king must test the strength of the lineage he chooses. This shadow girl? She hasn't even shifted in public. She has no rank. To choose her over the Golden Daughter is an insult to the tradition of the packs." I felt the familiar cold seep into my veins. He was right. In the eyes of the law I was a ghost. I had no standing, no achievements, and no voice. My father stepped forward, his face pale. "The beta is right, Your Majesty. Alara's untested. She cannot bear the weight of the king's mark. It would destroy her." "Is that what you think?" Caspian's voice dropped an octave, sending a literal shiver of power through the marble floor. He looked down at me, his eyes searching mine for a flicker of the fire he'd sensed. Do you wish to be protected by their low expectations, Alara? Or do you wish to show them why the moon is more dangerous than the sun? The decision hit me like a physical blow. If I stayed silent, I stayed safe, and I stayed invisible forever. If I spoke, I was declaring war on my father's authority and my sister's future. I looked at Kasha. Her eyes were narrowed, begging me to fail, to shrink back into the charcoal gray of my dress. I am not a child to be tested, I said, my voice rising, vibrating with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I stepped away from my mother's reach, standing fully in Caspian's shadow. And I am not a shadow. I am the woman the king looked at. That should be test enough for any of you. The beta laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Words are cheap, little wolf. If you claim the king's attention, you claim his challenges. I challenge your right to stand on this floor. Trial by scent. Prove you have the soul of a queen or crawl back to the kitchens. The trial by scent was an ancient, brutal ritual where an alpha would release their full, crushing aura. If the target couldn't stand under the weight of it, they were deemed omega glass, broken and unworthy of high status. It was a death sentence for someone as delicate as I was supposed to be. Caspian's hand tightened on mine. You don't have to do this, he whispered, his eyes flashing with a protective fury. I can end him where he stands. No, I whispered back, my heart hammering against my ribs. If I don't do this, I'll always be the girl you saved. I want to be the woman you chose. The inciting incident was more than a challenge. It was an awakening. As the beta began to release his foul, oppressive aura, the room began to spin. But then I felt it, a spark of something ancient and silver deep within my marrow. The king's gaze was on me, and for the first time the quiet one was ready to scream. The air in the ballroom turned into a physical weight, thick with the oily, oppressive scent of the beta's challenge. It was designed to make an unranked wolf drop to her knees, to strip away her dignity until she crawled from the hall in shame. I felt my lungs constricting, the charcoal silk of my dress suddenly feeling like lead armor. My mother's satisfied smirk and Kasha's triumphant glint were the only things I could see through the haze of the beta's mental assault. The room began to blur, the gold leaf on the pillars bleeding into the white marble floors. Give up, Ilara. My sister's voice drifted through the pressure, sweet and poisonous. Don't embarrass us further. You aren't built for this. But then I felt a hand on the small of my back. It wasn't pushing me down. It was a pillar of heat, a grounding force that smelled of ancient forests and lightning. Caspian Vance didn't interfere. He knew the laws of the trial, but he let his own aura wrap around mine like a protective cloak. It didn't fight the beta for me. It gave me the oxygen I needed to fight for myself. I took a breath, and instead of the beta's rot, I inhaled the king. Deep within my chest, something that had been dormant for 21 years finally snapped its chains. It wasn't the frantic, high-pitched yip of a frightened pup. It was a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my bones. I looked up, and for the first time I didn't see a crowd of judgmental nobles. I saw predators who were afraid of a girl they couldn't control. I took a step forward. Then another. The beta's eyes widened, his own scent faltering as I stood tall, my head unbowed. The silver spark in my blood flared, and for a split second my eyes didn't just reflect the light. They emitted it. A pale, lunar glow that silenced the whispers of the court. Is that all you have? I asked, my voice steady, carrying to the furthest corners of the hall. Because I've spent my whole life under the weight of my family's expectations. Your petty ego is nothing compared to that. The beta recoiled, the sheer shock of an invisible girl standing her ground breaking his concentration. The trial was over. I had won. But as the king's hand reclaimed mine, pulling me into the center of the floor for the first dance of the solstice, I saw the true danger beginning to take shape. Kasha wasn't crying. He was talking. In the shadows of the north balcony, my sister was huddled with Julian Thorpe, a name taken from a gritty political thriller and a classic horror film. Thorpe was the leader of the traditionalist faction, a man who believed the king should only mate with the highest-born son wolves to keep the bloodline pure. They were looking at me not as a sister or a subject, but as a parasite that needed to be excised. He's obsessed, I heard Kasha hiss as we swirled past them in a waltz. He's ignoring the Pax. If she stays, the alliance with the Western Pack fails. Caspian leaned down, his lips brushing my ear, his stubble sending jolts of electricity through my nervous system. Ignore them, Alara. They are fighting for a world that is already dead. You are the only thing in this room that is truly alive. But as we danced, the tension only escalated. Every interaction was a minefield. When we sat for the banquet, my wine was accidentally spilled by a servant who looked remarkably like Cash's personal maid. When Caspian left my side for 5 minutes to speak with a general, I was cornered by 3 highborn women who mocked my plain features, calling me a temporary fixation for a bored king. The obstacles were mounting, but so was my growth. I didn't shrink. I didn't cry. I used the wit I'd honed in the library to turn their insults back on them, my tongue as sharp as Caspian's claws. I was learning that being the king's choice meant I couldn't just be a shadow anymore. I had to be the blade. However, the red herrings were being planted. A letter was found, suggesting I had been secretly communicating with a rival pack to infiltrate the king's inner circle. My father was suddenly being investigated for treason, a move clearly designed to make me guilty by association. They are trying to isolate you, Caspian growled later that night as we stood in the private gardens, the tension between us thick enough to touch. They think if they take away your family and your reputation you'll run. They're wrong, I said, reaching up to touch the heavy signet ring on his finger. They gave me those things to keep me small. Taking them away only makes me more yours. The attraction between us was no longer a spark. It was a forest fire. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw a flicker of something he wasn't telling me. A secret about the king's own lineage that could change everything. The fragrance of crushed jasmine in the royal gardens was suffocating, a sweet mask for the tension that crackled between us. Caspian Vance stood like a monolith against the moonlight, his shadow swallowing mine entirely. The music from the ballroom was a distant, mocking hum. For the first time, the king's composure seemed to fracture, his fingers tracing the silver embroidery of my sleeve with a tremor he couldn't hide. You think they hate you because you're plain, Alara? Caspian's voice was a low, jagged rasp. He stepped closer, the heat radiating from his chest making my skin tingle. You think your mother hid you away to protect Cash's spotlight? You're so much smarter than that. Look at the patterns. Look at the fear in your father's eyes when I touched you. I shook my head, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. They told me I was a disappointment. A wolf who couldn't find her voice. I'm just the shadow, Caspian. That's all I've ever been. Liars, he growled, the word vibrating in the air. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a weathered piece of parchment, the seal of the High Luna broken and jagged. This was intercepted from your father's study an hour ago. It wasn't meant for me. It was meant for the Western Pack, a bribe to keep them quiet about the anomaly of the Sterling bloodline. I took the paper, my fingers shaking. As I read the cramped, frantic handwriting of my mother, the world didn't just tilt, it inverted. I wasn't a weak wolf. I wasn't an invisible sister. According to the ancient lineage records my parents had suppressed, I was a lunar prime, a rare genetic resurgence that appeared once every 5 centuries. My quietness wasn't a lack of power, it was a containment field. My scent was muffled because if I ever truly shifted, my aura would eclipse every alpha in the territory, including my father. They hadn't been protecting Cash's shine. They had been terrified that if the world saw me, the Sterling family would be accused of harboring a weapon of mass destruction. I was a threat to the very balance of the Great Packs. They kept you in the dark so you would never learn to use the light, Caspian whispered, his hand cupping my cheek. But that's not the only secret in this garden, Alara. I looked up at him, the silver in my eyes flaring with a new, terrifying intensity. What do you mean? Caspian let out a breath that sounded like a confession. I didn't call the gala to find a wife. I called it because the oracle told me the prime had finally matured. I came here to neutralize you. My council wanted you dead or imprisoned before your power could destabilize my throne. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. The dances, the whispered praise, the way he had defended me against the beta. Was it all a calculated move to get close enough to put a collar around my neck? I tried to pull away, but he held me fast, his eyes burning with a desperate, raw honesty. But then I saw you, he choked out, his dominance softening into something far more dangerous. Vulnerability. I saw the girl who edited her sister's speeches and mended lace with bleeding fingers. I saw a soul that was kinder than any king deserves. I didn't find a threat, Alara. I found the only person on this earth who can stand beside me without being burned alive. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The stakes had reached their zenith. If the council found out he was protecting a prime instead of eliminating one, it was civil war. If I stayed with him, I was a target for every alpha who feared my blood. "They're coming for us," I whispered, the realization dawning as I saw torches flickering toward the garden. "My family, your council. They won't let a prime and a king unite." "Then let them come," Caspian said, his voice hardening into steel. He didn't kiss me, not yet. He pressed a small obsidian dagger into my hand, the hilt warm from his skin. "Tonight we stop playing their games. Tonight the shadow becomes the sun." The revelation had shattered my past, but it had forged a terrifying new future. I wasn't just a girl in a charcoal dress anymore. I was a queen with the power to unmake kingdoms, and the man holding me was the only one brave enough to love the monster I was becoming. The garden, once a sanctuary of whispered truths, transformed into a cage of silver and shadow. The flickering torches weren't a search party, they were an execution squad. Before I could even process the weight of the obsidian dagger in my palm, the air was ripped apart by the howl of 100 wolves, a sound of coordinated clinical aggression. "Caspian, get back!" I screamed, but it was too late. A volley of silver-tipped nets dropped from the canopy, crackling with an electrical charge designed to paralyze a royal alpha. Caspian roared, his body shifting halfway into a massive midnight black wolf, but the silver burned into his skin, forcing him to his knees. "Step away from the anomaly, Your Majesty," my father's voice rang out, cold and devoid of the stuttering fear he'd shown earlier. He stepped from the brush, flanked by Julian Thorpe and a line of council enforcers. Beside him, Kasia stood with her arms crossed, her golden dress splattered with the mud of the garden, her face twisted into a mask of righteous fury. "You're sick, Alara," Kasia spat, her voice trembling with a jealousy that had finally rotted into hate. "You used your prime filth to bewitch the king. You're a parasite. A glitch in the bloodline. She is your sister." Caspian snarled, his voice a distorted rasp as the silver nets sang against his flesh. "She is a threat to the sovereignty of the northern packs," Julian Thorpe countered, stepping forward with a heavy iron collar. "And you, King Caspian, have been compromised. The council has already voted. By harboring a lunar prime, you have forfeited your right to the throne. You are being detained for your own protection." I tried to lunge for Caspian, to use the obsidian blade he'd given me, but my mother appeared behind me, her hand clamping a cloth soaked in wolfsbane over my mouth. I thrashed, my vision swimming as the world turned into a blurred smear of gray and gold. The last thing I saw was Caspian being dragged toward the dungeons, his eyes locked on mine with a desperate, agonizing promise, before the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up in a room that smelled of damp stone and ancient dust, the silent cell beneath our own manor. They had stripped me of my charcoal dress, replacing it with a thin white shift that made me feel even smaller. My power, that silver spark Caspian had ignited, felt like a cold ember. The wolfsbane in my system acted like a lead blanket, muffling my soul. The separation wasn't just physical, it was an amputation. I could feel the ghost of Caspian's bond through the stone walls, a throb of pain and fury that mirrored my own. My mother entered the cell, her footsteps echoing with a terrifying rhythm. She sat on the edge of my cot, smoothing my hair with a chilling tenderness. "You were never meant to be seen, Alara. If you had just stayed in the shadows, you could have lived a long, quiet life. But now the council needs an example." "You're framing him," I whispered, my throat raw. "You're telling the packs he tried to kill me to justify taking his crown." "We're telling them he failed to kill you," she corrected, her smile sharp and hollow. "And that Kasia was the one who saved you from his madness. He will be the hero. She will be the one who marries the next king, Julian Thorpe." The hopelessness was a physical weight heavier than any gravity. Caspian was in chains, branded a madman. I was a prisoner, my very blood labeled a curse. My family, the people who were supposed to be my pack, had traded my life for a seat at a table of tyrants. As I curled into a ball on the cold floor, the silence of the cell began to scream. I was the quiet one again. I was the shadow. And in the dark, without Caspian's heat to guide me, I wondered if the fire he'd seen in me was just a cruel trick of the light. The cold of the stone floor seeped into my skin, But it was the cold in my soul that threatened to extinguish the last of my light. I could hear the faint distant cheers from the great hall above, the celebration of my rescue and Cash's ascent. They were already toasting to my erasure. Is this it then? I whispered to the shadows. The quiet girl finally goes silent for good? I reached for the bond, that invisible golden thread that connected my heart to Caspian Vance. It felt frayed, vibrating with the agony of the silver nets they had used to bind him. I could feel his heartbeat, a slow, ragged thud against the darkness. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was mourning. He thought I was gone, or worse, that I had been broken by the very blood that made me a prime. I am here, I projected into the void of my mind, pushing against the leaden weight of the wolfsbane. Caspian, look at the moon. Even through the thick granite of the dungeon, I felt a surge of silver energy. It wasn't coming from the sky, it was coming from within. The wolfsbane was meant to suppress a wolf's shift, to keep the beast locked in a cage of chemicals. But I wasn't just a wolf. I was a lunar prime. My power didn't live in my muscles or my claws. It lived in the space between breaths, in the ancient, unyielding light of the soul. I sat up, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't need to shift to be powerful. I didn't need to be loud to be heard. I closed my eyes and visualized the charcoal dress I had worn, the color of embers before they ignite. I visualized the obsidian dagger Caspian had given me, still hidden in the hollow of the mattress where I'd shoved it before the blackout. My fingers brushed the hilt. It was cold, but as I gripped it, the silver spark in my blood didn't just flicker. It roared. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. They were afraid of me not because I was a weapon but because I was sovereign. I didn't need a pack to define me. I didn't need a sister to hide me. And Caspian didn't need to save me. He had simply been the mirror that showed me who I already was. I am Alara Sterling, I whispered, the words echoing with a strange harmonic resonance that made the dust in the cell dance. And I am done sitting quietly. The iron door of my cell groaned. The lock didn't just turn. It shattered, the internal mechanism melting under a sudden, localized burst of lunar heat. I stepped out into the corridor, the white shift I wore beginning to shimmer with a faint, iridescent glow. I felt Caspian's bond flare in response. He felt me. The mourning stopped, replaced by a predatory, lethal hope. Across the dungeon complex, I heard the sound of iron bars being ripped from stone. He was breaking free, fueled by the knowledge that his queen was coming for him. I didn't run. I walked with the measured, terrifying grace of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. I passed the guards, and before they could even raise their spears, the sheer pressure of my aura, the unfiltered raw essence of a prime, sent them to their knees, their eyes wide with a primal holy terror. "The king is in the north wing," I commanded, my voice layered with the authority of 5 centuries of ancestors. "And the gala is over." I wasn't the shadow anymore. I was the eclipse. And as I headed toward the stairs to reunite with the only man who had ever truly looked at me, I knew that the Golden Daughter and the Traitors' Council were about to learn a very painful lesson. You should never ignite the one you intend to extinguish. The grand doors of the throne room didn't just open. They were blasted off their hinges by a wave of pure, shimmering lunar pressure. The coronation of Julian Thorpe and the elevation of my sister was in full swing, the air thick with the smell of expensive champagne and the lie of my rescue. The music died in a discordant screech of violins. Every head in the hall turned. I stood in the doorway, my white shift glowing with an ethereal, blinding radiance that made the gold of the room look cheap and tarnished. My hair, usually pinned back in a tight, obedient bun, was wild and flowing, threaded with sparks of silver light. "The shadow has returned," I said, my voice resonating like a cathedral bell. Beside me, a shadow darker than the night stepped into the light. Caspian Vance was a vision of lethal retribution. His tunic was torn, his skin bore the red angry marks of the silver nets, but his eyes, those fiery, predatory eyes, were fixed on the cowering council. The dominance he radiated was no longer just a king's authority. It was a mate's vengeance. "Ilara!" my mother shrieked, her wine glass shattering on the marble. "Guards! Secure the anomaly. She's possessed by the madness of the king." The enforcers lunged, but they never reached us. I didn't need to touch them. I simply exhaled, and a pulse of silver energy rippled outward, freezing them in place as if the very air had turned to glass. I walked toward the dais, each step echoing with the weight of 500 years of suppressed power. Julian Thorpe stepped forward, drawing a ceremonial silver sword. You are a freak of nature, Alara Sterling. You are a stain on the purity of the Pax. The only stain in this room, Caspian growled, stepping in front of me, his claws extending with a terrifying metallic snick, is the coward who tries to kill a woman's soul because he is too small to lead her heart. Caspian moved like a blur of midnight. He didn't just fight Thorpe, he dismantled him. It wasn't a duel, it was an execution of an ego. With a single powerful strike, he shattered the ceremonial sword and pinned Thorpe to the throne by his throat. Tell them, I commanded, turning to my father and Kasha. Tell them the truth about the Sterling bloodline. Tell them why you hid the Prime. My father collapsed to his knees, his face ashen. But Kasha, my beautiful golden sister, she lunged at me with a concealed silver dagger, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated envy. It was supposed to be mine. The crown. The king. Everything. I didn't flinch. As the blade neared my throat, I caught it with my bare hand. The silver sizzled against my palm, but I didn't feel pain. I felt the absolute, unshakable reality of my own strength. The silver didn't burn me, it turned to dust in my grip. You were so busy looking at the sun, Kasha, I whispered, leaning close to her ear, that you forgot the moon is what moves the tides. You didn't lose the king because of me. You lost him because you couldn't see past your own reflection. I turned to the assembled alphas of the world, my hands still glowing with the residue of the destroyed blade. The Council of Traitors is dissolved, I declared. The age of hiding the powerful to protect the weak-minded is over. I am the Lunar Prime and this is my king. If any of you believe you are strong enough to challenge the moon, step forward. Silence. Total absolute silence. One by one the alphas, men who had mocked me hours ago, bowed their heads. Not out of fear of a monster but out of recognition of a queen. Caspian stepped to my side, his hand sliding into mine. The bond between us wasn't just a golden thread anymore. It was a bridge of fire. He looked at me and in his eyes I didn't see a project or a threat. I saw his equal. They see you now, Ilara, he murmured, his voice thick with pride. No, I said, looking out over the kingdom that was finally ours. They see the truth. And the truth is never quiet. The throne room, once a chamber of stifled breaths and rehearsed lies, was now flooded with a silver brilliance that felt like the first true dawn the kingdom had seen in centuries. The heavy, oppressive scent of the old council had been swept away, replaced by the clean electric ozone of the storm and the deep, grounding aroma of cedarwood. I stood at the edge of the dais, no longer draped in charcoal gray or the thin white shift of a prisoner. My gown was a masterpiece of midnight silk, woven with actual stardust that shimmered with every breath I took. Beside me, Caspian Vance wore the heavy mantle of the king, but his crown sat lighter on his head than it ever had before. He wasn't ruling alone anymore, he was anchored. The fate of my family had been decided not by malice, but by the very laws they had tried to weaponize against me. My father and mother were stripped of their titles and sent to the Outer Hebrides, a quiet, isolated life where they could no longer whisper poison into the ears of the powerful. And Kasha, my sister, was given the one thing she feared most, a life of ordinary service. She wasn't a star and she wasn't a villain. She was just a woman who had to learn to walk in the light without demanding it all for herself. The border packs have sent their envoys, Caspian murmured, his hand sliding around my waist to pull me flush against his side. The heat of him was my favorite constant, a reminder that the monster I was accused of being was the only thing that made him feel human. They aren't coming to negotiate, Alara. They're coming to swear fealty to the Prime. I leaned my head against his shoulder, looking out over the balcony at the thousands of wolves gathered in the courtyard below. They weren't cowering. They were looking up at us with a hope that brought tears to my eyes. We had turned a kingdom of fear into a kingdom of truth. Under our reign, no child would be hidden away because their power was too much, and no sister would be forced to dim her light so another could shine. I spent my life waiting for someone to notice me, I whispered, my voice no longer a fragile thing but a steady, resonant force. I thought I needed a king to make me visible. Caspian turned me in his arms, his fiery eyes searching mine with that same singular, obsessive focus he'd had since the moment he first saw me in the shadows. You were never invisible, Alara. You were just waiting for a man who was brave enough to handle the glare. He kissed me then, a slow, deep seal of a bond that had survived betrayal, silver nets, and the weight of a 1,000-year-old decree. In his touch, I felt the fulfillment of every silent prayer I'd ever whispered in my small bedroom behind the linen closet. I wasn't the quiet one or the plain one. I was the moon to his earth, the prime to his alpha, and the heart of a new world. As the pack let out a collective, joyous howl that shook the very foundations of the castle, I knew our story wasn't just about a girl who found a king. It was about a woman who found herself. The shadows were gone, the sun was high, and for the first time in my life I wasn't just sitting quietly. I was soaring. Thank you all for being part of Alara and Caspian's incredible transformation. This journey proves that even when the world tries to keep you in the dark, your true light will always find a way to break through. I want to hear from you. What's one shadow in your life that you're ready to step out of? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We have so many more emotional, high-stakes stories coming your way that you won't want to miss. Until the next moon rises, keep shining.